Well, welcome, folks. This panel session is really entitled kind of the cross sector exercise for hurricane season preparedness. A lot of this has been going on for a long time. However, what was missing was how can we bring states, a multiple bunch of states together with private industry to do very simple problem solving as part of the exercise. And so we found Greg Grillo. Greg is our facilitator today. I met Greg years ago. Greg's been facilitating major exercises nationwide within the electric sector for many years as part of their catastrophic planning, their national response event. Greg brings many years, I forget, Greg, how many years within the operations within the electric utility, retired, is now consulting back in there. So we were fortunate enough to get Greg and have him work through our hurricane season exercise, and we just finished our winter storm exercise. And it was really built on some of the processes Greg and all the utilities designed, along with Persia Payne Hurley in North Carolina, Tom Farmer, Kent, the folks you heard from today, kind of all helped shape it. So I'm really glad for you all to hear this and get into this discussion here. Going forward, we're going to see a lot more of these very quick, fast, operational type TTXs that are simple, that produce results, produce information, and keep feeding a playbook that Greg is managing for the group. So Greg, I'll turn it over to you, and appreciate all of you guys for taking time to jump on the panel today. Thank you.
Yeah, first, I'd like to thank the panel for your time dedicated to this session today. Just real quick, last July, the private sector organized a virtual tabletop exercises with several of the Gulf states in preparation for the upcoming 2021 hurricane season. And participants included people from electric, communications, fuel, transportation, rail, water, food, finance, retail sectors, also the states. The tabletop was designed to identify the participants' preparedness and response processes, look at the top 3 data sets they needed to monitor after landfall, and the systems that they use for situational awareness. The tabletop outcomes were tested during Hurricane Henry and also Ida and produced some valuable operational outcomes. So our theme for today is the panel will discuss the tabletop strategy, the outputs, and how the outputs were operationalized during real world events. And again, panelists, and I'm gonna do this alphabetically. That way I'm not picking any favorites right here. So I like them all equally. First, we've got Tom Farmer, who's with the American Association of Railroads. We've got Ken Keldo with Business Continuity for Verizon, and Jim Williams. So if you could, Tom, tell us what your title is, what your daytime job is, and what your storm job is. Kick it over to Tom. Tom Farmer.
Thanks, Greg, very much. And let me commend your work, both in facilitating this discussion, as well as the efforts we undertook for the exercise during the summer advance of the hurricane season. And I think the discussion this afternoon is going to show some of the benefits that flowed from that effort. I serve as the Assistant Vice President for Security with the Association of American Railroads. And we are privileged to represent the major freight railroads that operate in the United States and Canada, called Class 1 railroads. There are 7 of those. We also represent a large number of regional and short line carriers. Amtrak is one of our members, as well as a growing number of commuter railroads. And this collective effort, I manage a security program. We operate under a unified security plan. It's been in effect for more than 2 decades now. It was established in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. Over time, it expanded its focus from what had been terrorism primarily, now broader to direct action tactics by aggressive activists, domestic extremism, cybersecurity, and a big portion of my responsibilities as well is support for emergency management and resiliency, including the work we do in connection with the hurricane season, other severe weather, and unexpected emergency events. So in terms of what I do in storm participation, I represent the industry with government through the Critical Infrastructure Cross-Sector Council, through the Emergency Support Function 14 engagement we have with the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and a lot of information sharing with representatives, officials of affected states, federal officials, state and local officials, colleagues in our industry, our partners in other transportation modes and other sectors. So thank you very much for the opportunity this afternoon to participate in this very vibrant discussion.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. Now let's go alphabetically to Kent. Kent, tell us about yourself, title, and your daytime job and your storm job.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. My name's Kent Kildow. I work at Verizon. And for the last 6 years, I had the honor of leading our global business continuity and emergency management program. Everyone on this call is well aware of our domestic presence, both on the wireless and the wireline side, but we are an international company and have presence worldwide. That included all of our business continuity planning programs, as well as our emergency management program. My team's primary role during a response was to facilitate the company's response to any incident and ensure that we were getting back to business as normal as quickly as possible. Telecommunications has always been an important part of the community's response to a disaster, and that importance continues to grow as people continue to see greater reliance on the exchange of information and the ability to connect during a response. Above that, I am part of the All Hazards Consortium and currently fill the role as the chairman for our Sensitive Information Sharing Exchange Committee, and great opportunity to work with a number of partners across industry and in the public sector as part of that effort as well. Greg?
Thank you, Kent. And last but certainly not least is my Cajun brother from another mother, Jim Williams.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jim Williams. I am the operations officer for the Louisiana Business Emergency Operations Center. We focus mainly during the hurricane months, partnering with our private entities and the public agencies and the Governor's Office of Homeland Security. When it's blue skies and no wind days, not in hurricane season, I work with the Informatics Research Institute here at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and have been a member of the AHC Private Sector Liaison Committee for about a year now. And it has been just a great opportunity to share amongst my peers what works, what doesn't work, and just sharing of information. Because while it may not be hurricane season here, it's winter season up north, and it's always wildfire season somewhere. So it's been just a great opportunity to work with all the folks at the All Hazards Consortium, and looking forward to this discussion of our tabletop exercise.
Great, appreciate that, Jim. And then Kent mentioned the Sensitive Information Sharing Exchange, is something we refer to as SISNet. That tool we will use during the exercise. Again, that is a tool, kind of a data brokerage capability to synchronize data sharing across operations, federal, state, and local, industry, and others. And there's several use cases associated with that system. One or two of the use cases we've been working on is hurricane response and winter storm response. So that's what we use that system for that. The objectives of the tabletop exercises was to identify opportunities to improve operational coordination and communications between the sectors and the government, mainly the states, by understanding what government and the sectors did to prepare for and respond to real events. We used the Gulf hurricane and the northeastern hurricane and winter storm. It was also to understanding what data is currently available in SISNet, identify what additional data needs might be out there, to identify additional data available from participants or other sources, again, to make SISNet more robust. So let's go ahead and get started. And I'm gonna start with Tom first. We'll go alphabetical, then we'll switch it up as we move forward. This was a cross-sector effort. You know, I'd like to have a little discussions about the importance of developing cross-sector relationships and high-level knowledge of processes prior to an incident. And then also, do you have any success stories from the incidents from, say, Hurricane Ida or Hurricane Henry after the tabletop exercises? So Tom, I'll go to you first.
Thanks, Greg, very much. In terms of the work we did in the exercise and its value, as I thought about what we accomplished, yes, information sharing was a vital component, but I also know that the participants had generally done very well in that area beforehand. What we gained in our industry was much better insight into the sorts of concerns that our counterparts have in state and local government, how their priorities align with ours, how they may differ, what pressures they're operating under, what considerations are driving their decision-making, and similarly with the participants from other industries, other sectors. And I think that insight was particularly valuable because it's one thing to be sharing information, you're in the midst of the response, you're providing updates on the status of impact to your operations. In our case, where are trains moving, where are they not moving, what are we projecting in terms of restoration of operations. It's providing that sort of information, getting it from other sources, but having a good understanding of what your counterparts, what circumstances they're operating under, and in particular what their priorities are and why, that was invaluable. And I'll give you a practical example. I'm a very strong advocate of working for a more consistent approach from storm to storm, regardless of a location, essentially regardless of what states are impacted, a more consistent approach for access and reentry of essential workers. So we can get the right people on the ground to ensure that conditions are stabilized and that the response and recovery process commences and flows smoothly. So that we can begin to restore some normalcy to the impacted communities and ensure relief supplies and other necessities are getting to their destinations. But that emphasis, it comes with a cost if you're a state and local government official who's trying to manage how many people are in the area, can we support that volume of people? So it's very good insight to get the state and local perspective, and it really adjusted how we looked at this problem. And as we work with, in particular, our federal partners to try to facilitate a solution, ensuring that state and local considerations are at the fore. In terms of a success story, the one that Tom Moran raised as we were just getting ready to start this discussion, we had a very serious problem. The hurricane that impacted Louisiana, the major storm that impacted caused substantial disruption, particularly inland. For us, there were a lot of areas where there were down power lines across tracks. In one particularly serious case, it was across a rail yard, leaning on, thankfully, empty tank cars. A lot of effort had to be devoted to getting that safely cleared in the context of electrical utility workers having to manage lots of other demands on their time and resources. We had a very good relationship that we had maintained for an extended period with the Edison Electrical Institute. We were able to work through that organization, which represents utilities around the country. That helped ensure there was understanding by the local power utility as to what the need was and why it was so important, what the impact was to operations, and particularly what was the impact to the affected communities because rail service could not come from the northern central part of the country. That collective effort and a lot of exceptional work on the ground led to resolving those challenges, I think, far more quickly than most involved thought would have been the case when you saw the first images of the impacts. So that was a direct result of the discussions and I think the understandings we gained in terms of the demands that our partners face and presenting our needs in that context. So thanks, Greg, for the opportunity to address that point.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. Kent, same question. Just kind of, the importance of developing cross-sector relationships and high-level knowledge of processes before the incident. And do you have any success stories?
So, Greg, I'm going to share a couple of points that build on what Tom already shared with us. I would agree with all of the points that Tom made, but I'm going to take it down a little bit more operationally and bring forward 3 points. This type of a tabletop exercise, one, helped us better understand how to engage with our partners, both in the public sector and in the private sector. Every organization has tools that they use to communicate and processes that they have in place, and understanding those enhances our ability to communicate effectively during a crisis. It's a little bit of a tough time when you have to not only learn how they operate, but try to engage during a disaster. The second, and I already started to build on that, is those operational processes. How do you engage with each of those organizations and either get the support or provide the support that they need as efficiently and effectively as possible? Those started to come forward in the exercise as well. And then finally, I would tell you that even for partners that we've worked with for a long time, no one's organization is static. We heard about some changes that several of the organizations that were that we've worked with in the past were implementing and gave us that foresight so that we understood how they were going to change their operations for the next disaster. It once again helped us be as efficient and effective as possible working with them post-disaster. The thing that I would say is the evolution of those exercises did result in more efficient and effective in communications in both of the disasters that you called out, Greg, and allowed us to help all of our customers and the communities that we support get back to business as usual as quick as we could. Greg?
Fantastic. Thanks, Kent. Jim, same question to you, my brother.
I want to echo what the other panelists said. As the public sector representative on the panel here, it was good to be able to see how the things that we were doing in the state and laying out what our processes were, how they aligned with and how they differed from what our private sector partners were doing. So that was invaluable. The practical example that I will give is from Hurricane Ida, and it's a direct result of the TTX. Within 24 hours, there was an extreme fuel shortage in the state. We had lost 7 of our 8 refineries due to either physical damage or loss of power. Several of the terminals were down as well. Widespread damage to fueling station, gas stations, convenience stores, and stuff like that. So there was a huge gas shortage within 24 hours post-storm because the people that stayed were running, generators to power their homes. Made a call to Sherry Stone from the fuel sector, and within a few hours, she replicated what the electrical industry did and called in partners from across the country. And within 72 hours of the landfall, we had an additional 100 trucks moving fuel in the state to get it to the retail locations. And within about 4 days, there were over 200 trucks helping the state of Louisiana move fuel to get it out to the citizens where they could, refuel their cars, refuel their generators and stuff like that. And that was a direct result of understanding who to talk to and where to plug in. And then, Sherry modeling what the electrical industry does when it calls in its partners from across the areas to help in these times of storms. So that was my practical example of what came out of the TTX.
All righty, thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. Before we go into the next topic, which we're going to pick on Kent on, got Laura. We got a poll we're going to send out to try to get some input from people regarding exercises. Laura.
Yeah, so if all of our listeners look at their Zoom screen, the first poll should be popping up now. The question is, did your agency or firm conduct or participate in any training exercises in 2021? Were they in person only, both in person and virtual only, or no, you didn't do any? And we'll just give about 10 more seconds. I can also tell this way, Greg, who's paying attention.
Really? It says I can't vote. I'm paying
No,
attention.
panelists can't vote.
Exactly.
All right, just a few more seconds, folks. Votes are still coming in.
Survey says.
All right, I think all of the votes are pretty much in. So let's take a look at what we have here. Greg, you want to read through these?
Sure. Let's see. We've had 18% said no, they did not participate in any training exercise. We had 4%, 2 out of 45 people said they're in person only. We had 18 of the 45 said that they had both in person and virtual. And then the 17 said that we had virtual only, which amounted to 38%. So again, it's kind of a close between both in-person and virtual only, and only 2 in-person only. Back to you, Laura.
All right, great. We have another poll, a quick one here. Let me go ahead and launch that. Did your exercise include cross-sector participants or players? Give about 10 seconds to get this poll in.
You got to be honest
Coming in
now.
fast. Yeah. Mhm. No
Just 'cause-
judgment
just-
here.
Yeah, just because we're covering cross sector doesn't mean you got to say that was cross sector.
That's right. All right, just a few more seconds.
All right, good news. It said that 67% was cross sector. That's 28 out of 42, and only 14% said that it was not cross sector. So the majority looks like was I guess 2/3 of the participants that answered the question said that they did do cross sectors. That's great news. Great news. Thanks, Laura. Appreciate that.
All right.
All right, next we're going to move on to another topic. And then Tom Moran and I were talking. We're saying we're wondering if this was the first ever kind of multi-state cross-regional effort. In other words, with this tabletop exercise, we went cross states and across FEMA regions. Kent, what were some of your key operational outcomes that you saw from the exercise being both multi-state and cross-regional?
A couple of quick points, Greg. First, as a organization that works across a lot of those boundaries you just described, we identified and affirmed the need to have a number of liaisons ready to work with key partners. We have traditionally put liaisons into the state EOCs, in some cases for hard impacted or major metropolitan areas. We've also put liaisons in at the county and sometimes city level. And then, of course, working back with FEMA. Having a team that is ready to do that work is important. And I would suggest that, for organizations that are putting that type of liaison program in place, making sure that they understand how to act as a liaison and work effectively in a partnership during a crisis in an EOC is extremely important. I can't speak for all organizations, but I know for our organization, we do not have enough full-time dedicated emergency management professionals to fill all of those roles. So we take our account teams and other critical engineering resources, we train them how to be a liaison, give them the opportunity to fill that role during a crisis. And I think one of the things that came out of this tabletop exercise is, one, the need to allow them to participate in some of those internal exercises, which we have probably not done enough of in the past, and also make sure that we are getting them the opportunity to participate in our partners exercises so that they can be part of that coordinated effort in those EOCs. It is an evolution that we are continuing to work on, and partnering in the EOCs and being able to provide critical real-time information effectively is another piece of what we're working on. The tabletop exercises that you helped facilitate really reinforced the importance of that work and the need to make sure that we are doing that across the entire operating footprint. Greg, I'll hand it back to you.
Great, great. And Jim, you come from a unique position because you represent the state of Louisiana. And we're talking about here is kind of something that was done multi-state and across regional efforts. So, again, discussions and learnings from the tabletop exercise being multi-state and cross FEMA regions, and any key operational outcomes.
So I will bring up two great points that came out of this TTX. And one of them was just the continuing to build with my peers, those relationships. So when Hurricane Ida was coming on, I spoke to my peer in Texas probably at least once, maybe twice a day, because things that were going on in Louisiana were going to help, or were going to affect Texas. if we have evacuees, and also in Arkansas as well. The other great point that came out of the TTX, and we would not have realized this, or maybe we would have, but the problem that we annotated was the FEMA region cuts the Gulf in half. So, I've been in discussions with my FEMA regional rep to say, y'all need to have the ability to have an ad hoc region, because, the fact that Mississippi and Louisiana are in different FEMA regions, if something hits, on the eastern edge of the state, it's going to affect Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida as well. So those were the two big things. Had we not really kind of looked at this as a multi-state event and really kind of talked through the things that were happening and what we refer to during that time as pass-through states, the event is not happening in your state, but resources and are coming either into or out of your state. Those were two great points that came out of the tabletop.
Great, thank you, Jim. Tom Former, same question to you. We think this is the first multi-state cross-regional effort. What key operational outcomes did you see?
So from our vantage, particularly at the industry level, this was the first time we had an opportunity to work very closely with state government representatives in an exercise setting where there's more time, again, to discuss those priorities, those concerns, the response mechanisms and procedures in place. We'd worked with a lot of our colleagues at state level through information sharing. There are many recipients of the products that we produce and disseminate through a capability we maintain called the Railway Alert Network. We do that for terrorism, for security, for cybersecurity, for emergency preparedness, for storm response. We're also proud to be recipients of excellent work from the Louisiana Emergency Operations Center, from other states, particularly that group of states in the arc of likely hurricane impact during the seasons each year. But what we hadn't had the opportunity to do before is to really talk at a more in-depth level. And so again, as I alluded earlier, when you're responding to events, and we've been through several years now, working with colleagues, federal government, state, local government, across sectors, when you're responding to the event, you're meeting your responsibilities, you're pumping out information, you're addressing requests that come in, both for information and assistance. And there's not really time to sit back and contemplate, well, how are my partners affected by this? Is there any assistance that I can offer based on what I know about that? This exercise gave a chance for those considerations to come to the fore. And again, it was invaluable to have an understanding of how some of the priorities we might have identified as industry as we put them together might actually cause disruptions, particularly for state officials trying to manage the storm and its impacts and the response efforts. And we were able to take those insights and adjust our approaches accordingly. And in particular, that as we're working on these priorities we've defined in areas like access and reentry, like access to GIS data for particularly inland flooding and drain off of water and the effects of storms, for temporary waivers of regulations, for protection of workers. And we're looking at from the vantage, not just of what is it that the industry, the railroad industry wants to accomplish, what is it that the private sector wants to accomplish through our Critical Infrastructure Cross-Sector Council, but how what we're doing supports what state and local officials are confronting when they're managing these incidents. And I think that perspective has been invaluable. It's helped us to alter our approach to ensure we're taking those factors into consideration. And I think have a much stronger position, especially when we're working with federal partners. But these are not just priorities that we're looking to pursue as an industry or as a private sector at large. These are priorities that we know from experience, what we learned from our work in this exercise, how we put some of the lessons into practical effect this past hurricane season that will be beneficial for our state and local partners as well. So thanks for the opportunity to address that point.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. And Jim, before we go to the next question, I got a personal question for you. How's the crawfish season looking this year? It's going to be a good season or what?
It's looking phenomenal.
That's great news. Great news. All right, let's talk about operational. We tried to make sure that the tabletop was operationally focused. What did you see as the key operational areas of focus?
Well, I think because we had an opportunity to design this thing, having the AHC background data that around the map that says, hey, we are 48 hours from landfall, or we are 24 hours post landfall. When we changed phases, having that map up there really was able to focus everybody on where it was, where it is, and where it's going. And so everybody could then focus their discussions on, okay, it's 24 hours post landfall. We're in the active response phase, or we're exiting the response phase and going into the recovery phase. What are your actions at the state level, and then at our private sector partners? And I think being able to lay that out, especially at the state level, so that our private sector partners could understand exactly what the state's actions are post-storm, pre-storm, was invaluable in this whole tabletop exercise, and really kind of focusing around the map and the track. And kudos to AHC to be able to collect that data and have it historically, so that we can very easily bring that back up and use it as the tabletop exercise.
Great, Jim. Thank you. So same question to you, Tom. From an operational focus, what did you see as the key areas of operational focus?
What this exercise did, and I'm going to build on the points just made, the chronology, the progression through the various phases of preparation, of assessing impacts, of coordinating response. It gave the opportunity to slow the event down. And again, when you're dealing with an actual storm, even though there's a buildup and you've got notification sometimes a few days in advance that the storm is coming, you're in the mode of getting ready, of working with your colleagues across the industry, facilitating preparations, providing a lot of reporting to interested organizations, particularly in the federal government. And so in that pace of activity, you don't really take the time to slow down and think, well, here's what we're doing and why we're doing it at this particular stage in the development of this concern related to this storm. This exercise very much allowed for that breakdown. And again, to contemplate, here's what we're doing in our industry. Now, how do I present that in a way that the colleagues I'm working with on this exercise understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we do it, and what role they can play in facilitating our efforts. And sometimes that role is simply allowing us to function because we get the right people into the right places to solve the problems. But looking more broadly than the particular priorities of our industry, railroads often aren't considered when you're thinking in terms of support for a response. And my hope is that some of the depth that we provided in terms of why we put such a premium on getting crews in early to assess impacts and restore rail lines. In most cases, it's twofold. Yes, we're looking to sustain regional and national supply chains, but we also understand that the impacted area has a vast need for the necessities to manage in conditions where you may be dealing with intense heat, with flooding, with local outlets to obtain needed supplies damaged severely. And railroads can bring in high volumes of materials. That includes food, that includes building materials to deal with damage that storm has impacted. That includes, we had some discussion in the hurricane that impacted Louisiana this summer about how we might be able to bring in high volumes of ice and maintain that resource in refrigerated rail cars. But I think some of what the exercise did is prompted that creative thinking in terms of, okay, when the railroads are pushing to get their people in to restore operations, there's a goal there and there's a value that's broader than what our industry covers. And that broader value is the benefit we can bring to bear in marshaling supplies and supporting the emergency relief effort and ensuring that municipalities, states have a resource they can look to that's part of the solution. So we're not just relying on trucks getting materials in, we're relying on rail cars and get them to areas close to where they're needed and perhaps limit the amount of distance that trucks have to use, which can be particularly important when you're dealing with a fuel shortage situation. So what I got out of the exercise was what I learned from my counterparts and understanding the demands and the challenges they're facing. What I hope I contributed was some of this perspective on why we're seeking early access and what benefits we can bring to bear that support the response and relief effort. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Kent, from your perspective.
Yeah, Greg, I would focus on the ability to information share through the SciSnet or through other means of information sharing, and really taking that information that's coming from our cross-sector partners and implementing it into our response decisions. And I'll use a couple of points to illustrate that. The first, from our public sector partners, where evacuation notices have been issued. Are these evacuation notices that are due to life and safety issues where we should not be trying to get our teams into for the recovery right away? Or is there an opportunity for critical infrastructure to get in and start to affect repairs before the general population has returned? The faster we can get that information and incorporate it into our response, the better we will be able to optimize the resources that we have in footprint. Another example of that is our commercial power partners do a great job of attacking any network impacts that they have and getting things restored as quickly as possible. But understanding their estimates for timelines and where they're focusing their efforts allows us to, better use our resources. In some cases, we have to allow the power companies to make things safe before we get in there to work on the telecommunications networks. We want to be right behind them. Understanding where their focus is allows us to do that. It also helps us understand where things may take a little bit longer to restore and where we should focus our deployment of mobile assets for backup power and our refueling operations, because we will understand where it may take a little bit longer to get that commercial power back on. So through the SciSnet or through partnerships that we illustrated through the tabletop exercise, the ability to bring that information in, operationalize it, and then use it to make decisions for your own response, I think is one of the big lessons coming out of the tabletops that we conducted and how we'll be operating going forward.
Thank you, Kenny. It's kind of funny. I spent my career, as Tom said, in the electric sector, 33 plus years, and just learned so much about the interdependencies, between the various sectors, whether it's food, fuel, working with the states, communications. It's just amazing how much interdependencies there are there. We go to the next area. Before we go there, I think, Tom, there's a question for you regarding does AAR include the commuter railroads? In some cities, they are essential to evacuation and otherwise moving people. I'm not sure if you can answer that question real quick.
Oh, yeah, I could certainly answer the question. There are a significant number of commuter railroads that are part of our association as members. We also reach most commuter railroads in the country through the information we provide pertaining to security, physical and cyber, emergency preparedness, and storm response. So they are part of the group that we interact with when we're responding to hurricanes and severe storms. And yes, it is a good point that commuter rail, Amtrak can be part of the solution in evacuating people from areas that are going to be impacted by a severe storm. In the past, in Louisiana in particular, we've had Amtrak used on a number of occasions to move evacuees out of the immediate impact area, get them set up in accommodations outside of the likely track of the storm, and then have Amtrak available to facilitate their return. Particularly useful for those in communities who don't have the means to get themselves out of the area because they may not have a car or access to family members or friends who do. So it's a very good question. Thank you for raising that point.
And then before we go to the next topic, Tom, I just have a little discrepancy with my brother from another mother. I think the breakfast of champions is a crawfish omelet. That's just my opinion. Anyway. Tom, question for you. What did you see as the unique value of a virtual tabletop exit? What's so unique about it from your perspective?
What was unique from our perspective, my perspective specifically in coordinating the overall railroad industry effort, was that opportunity to engage in more thorough dialogue on the challenges raised in storm response, what all the different components that are involved, what they're actually doing, what their challenges are, what their priorities are, what the rationale for those decisions and those actions are. And that applies for my colleagues in other sectors. Again, we work together through cross-sector counts. We work together in responding to storms together in the sense that we're part of the overall effort. But taking time to really delve into some of the details of how the response happens, that hadn't been the case previously. It was with this exercise. And with state and local government officials that participated, the same benefit. And I'd not had the privilege of interacting in depth. Again, we've shared information, we've been on the same calls, we've heard each other brief, but talking in depth about all of those areas of concern, how they're being managed, why they're being managed that way, what their priorities are, and how we might work better to ensure all interests are effectively addressed. That was of tremendous value. And in terms of effects, again, as I noted earlier, there have been some priorities we've been pursuing with DHS's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and with FEMA pertaining to enhancing collaborative efforts for response to hurricanes and other severe weather. And we made some adjustments to our approach based on some of the insights I gained from my colleagues at state and local government and what they have to manage and how some of what we were pursuing may have been disruptive to them. We've adjusted that, and I think we've alleviated that concern. And I think we'll be able to work very effectively in concert, as we will have to put some of these priorities into effect. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate that. Kent, what about from Verizon or communications perspective?
Well, I just share a couple of thoughts, Greg. First, everyone is under budgetary pressures and scheduling pressures because of all of the work that our organizations, both public sector and private sector, are trying to accomplish. Having a virtual tabletop exercise allowed us to bring all of these diverse teams together from across a very wide footprint with no operational budget impacts for the teams. It allowed for a much broader set of participants. And, when you're doing it face to face, you got to be one and done. You don't have the ability to bring people back together on a regular basis. I'm not sure Tom called it out, but you did such a great job of facilitating the tabletops. We made you do it 3 times and focused on different segments of the response in each of those tabletops. It kept it bite-sized for all of the participants, allowed us to really focus on the specific area of the response that we needed to, and then assess those lessons and come back together, a couple of weeks later to focus on another area. So a lot more flexibility when you are conducting exercises virtually versus trying to bring everyone together. I would not suggest that it should completely replace face-to-face exercises, but an amazing way to augment those face-to-face exercises and get a lot more done over time instead of waiting for the ability to bring everyone together. I'm not even going to get into the ability to address organizational COVID-19 travel restrictions. I think that's a pretty obvious one, but another reason that this was a perfect time to use a virtual exercise versus a gathering the team together physically.
Great,
Greg?
Ken, appreciate that. And Ken, I can facilitate face-to-face too, just to let you know that. I can do that too. All right, let's go to Jim.
No doubt about that, Greg. You did a great job.
Jim, what about from your perspective? What was or is the unique value of a virtual tabletop exercise?
Okay, so when we hosted it, or when we participated in this tabletop exercise, I had only been in position for about 9 or 10 months. My previous experience, and I didn't go over it necessarily in the background, but I came from 25 years of being a member of the Louisiana National Guard. So I was always really focused on the response phase of this. And so what was unique about the virtual tabletop is, and as Kent said, we were able to get all of these diverse sectors together. And then for me, and I'll use Tom as a perfect example, we had talked about, using railroads as part of the mass evacuation of New Orleans. But, there's a lot more stuff that's going on the railroads than I had ever really considered. And in Kent's point, he brought up about how soon can they get in following the storm, and is it safe for for the telecom guys to get in right behind the power guys, or can they work simultaneously? It was eye-opening for me to be able to see how we can take all of these diverse sectors who are all trying to do the Lord's work and get and restore services and get people as close back to normal as they can. And how we can all pull together by doing a virtual exercise. And I think, Kent, you hit the nail on the head. Having that exercise over several days where we did it for a couple hours and then being able to go back, because I know, like everybody else, if you go to one of these, especially whether it be in person or virtual, when you add it all up, I think it was probably about 6 hours worth of tabletop exercise. And then you'd be brain dead for about a day afterwards. But being able to do it in small pieces like that and just covering a particular phase was the exact right way to do it. And Greg, you did a great job as far as moderating that thing, keeping everybody focused and knowing when to put things in the parking lot and when to drive the nail home on a particular topic. So the whole setup on the virtual exercise was great. Thank you.
All right, appreciate that. Got one last area of topic to discuss. I want to try to bias the panel a little bit to maybe say at least, once every other week, maybe, 10 times a year or something like that. But my question for you, Kent, is where do you see the future of SciSnet tabletop exercises going for communications?
So Greg, I'll touch on a couple of points. First, the exercise is really helped us start to take another look at what information we are willing to share and who we are willing to share it with. Some information we are fine sharing with everybody and should share with everybody. That's an easy one. But there's probably some more nuanced information that we want to share with key public and private sector partners. And we're really starting to have internal discussions about where we can challenge our previous comfort levels with sharing information, and we'll bring that forward to the sites as we go forward. The second thing I would say, Greg, is that all of our organizations are extremely dynamic, not only from a process perspective as we continue to refine and improve our capabilities, but trying to understand that. And the other piece I would draw forth right now is that from a people perspective, we've got a lot of change in our organization over time, and I know others do as well. So the relationships that we build today are great, but we'll need to continue to refresh those as our team changes and as your teams change to make sure that we maintain that level of connectivity and that comfort level of working together. So personally, I'm looking forward to a more frequent cadence of exercises through the SICE as we go forward. Greg?
Great, Ken, thank you. Jim, back to you. What do you think besides every other week or 20 times a year?
Well, what I think probably quarterly would probably be good at the national level, and then we can kind of divide it up to, one of them is focused on, an area like wildfires out in the West. I don't have a whole lot of experience on it, but I would love to hear some of those challenges because there's lessons that you can learn as the public sector coordinator for the wildfire response that may relate to something that happens in Louisiana, like a large oil refinery fire that may have similar aspects. And I will say this, and to answer one of the questions that came up in the chat, Mitch, the exercise that we did was what I thought was so successful at the national level. I'm modeling it in Louisiana. So yes, we're going to probably do a mini TTX, and we're going to do it regionally based so that we can kind of have particular focuses and get maximum participation going forward. But that's all I had, Greg. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tom, what about from your perspective?
I think there's substantial value from this process. And quarterly, 3 times a year, where we're focusing on these sort of very practical response situations, preparedness and response situations. Now, many of us have been involved in a whole range of exercises, security exercises, cybersecurity exercises. And often one of the challenges we've run into, particularly when we've done them with federal government partners, is often the scenario is so complex or so disruptive that you're spending most of the time focusing on what's gone wrong and not enough on what you can do well and get right. I think the beauty of this forum is we were focusing on a very particular set of circumstances that unfortunately all the participants are familiar with. But that familiarity didn't mean they know all the nuances about how response efforts happen within their own industries, across sectors, with partners in state and local government in particular. And I think this process allowed that to happen. And the fact that it could be conducted so well virtually, I think is really significant because the likelihood of bringing together the talent in person that was assembled for this effort, not a very high likelihood, obviously under current conditions, but even where we're back to normal. The likelihood that all the participants could have actually traveled to a location and participate directly is not very high. But also realistically, this is a sort of interaction. This is how the interaction is going to happen. You're not going to be sitting in a room with your colleagues from the state of Louisiana or the state of Florida or the electricity sector. They're going to be working from where they're set up, whether that's a headquarters they maintain outside the affected area or a location that they've gone to because it's the operations center or it allows them to continue to function in the area of impact. So I think that the virtual element is very realistic because that's how we're going to interact. And I think the area that we want to focus on moving forward is this discussion this afternoon, the discussion, the exercises. A lot of references were made to lessons learned, to ways we might improve, to priorities that different participants were pursuing and why. And I think taking that work and looking at it in terms of, are there some fundamental areas that we want to focus on to prioritize to try to enhance our collective efforts? So that if there's concerns that come up repeatedly in discussions and during the exercise, there were key areas that came up over and over again, regardless if the participant was representing an industry or a state and local government component, some of the same concerns were coming up around information sharing, around communications, around response coordination. I think those are the areas we want to focus on. Are there opportunities for us to work together to propose and effect the solutions that would allow us to go to our partners in the federal government that are trying to manage this effort from a national perspective and say, here's what the expertise assembled for this exercise process. Here's what they've identified as significant in terms of priorities for improvement. Here's what they've come to in terms of how it could work. Now, how do we work with you at the federal government to put that into effect through the Emergency Support Function 14 process so that we're taking these effective practices that have been proposed and we're institutionalizing them to elevate our collective efforts going forward. So I think that's where opportunity rests. And I hope as we look at the exercises, we also look at the outcomes and recognize we're putting together a great deal of invaluable information on effective practices, on proposed solutions. And now how can we work together to put them into effect? Thanks much.
Thanks, Tom. One thing that, this was definitely action-oriented and results-focused. I mean, we had lessons learned. We had after-action items identified for potential future use cases. We had information from the tabletop was utilized to enhance data for SciSnet. We're in the process of developing a playbook to improve operational communication and coordination between the sectors and the government. And again, the whole goal is to have a safe and timely recovery from a significant incident impacting the lives of American citizens. So I think that's very important. Any questions? Do we have any questions out there?
Hey, Greg, I don't see any that have come in just yet.
Okay. And on the screen, it's just open the Q&A window, type your question, and then hit send. And Laura, can you let me share my screen if you don't mind real quick?
Oh, yeah, sure.
It's for my brother. Any questions?
All right, Greg, thank you so much. Tom Moran?
We got two questions. One question is, how are you planning / exercising the growing challenge of all things social media? But that's so easy. I'm gonna let either Kent, Tom, or Jim answer that question.
So Tom here, I'll take an initial crack. In the railroad industry, we hold a very substantial security exercise involving freight and passenger railroads operating in the US and Canada. It's one of the elements of the implementation of our comprehensive industry security plan. That is a very involved exercise, takes place over a period of several hours. A lot of different scenario activities going on by design. We feel like if the participants can manage the stress that we put them through in that exercise, they're going to be able to handle the much more likely situation that emerges when they're dealing with one or two ongoing incidents. But I raise that because the social media aspect and the news media aspect are parts that we have focused a lot of attention on, because obviously a response to a security event, physical or cyber, or some other form of emergency doesn't happen in a vacuum. Your word is getting out. There's media coverage. There's inquiries are coming in from news media. There's posting this on social media. There's false information. There's congressional inquiries, and we've actually worked all of that activity into the exercise. We have a platform that the Transportation Security Administration has worked with us to provide access to, and it actually simulates news media and social media postings that are very much geared toward the scenario that we're exercising. So in the course of our exercises, we actually have news feeds, social media posts, and actions on those built into the exercise, so that the security teams are coordinating with their public communications groups, the government affairs groups, because those are the sources that they're going to go through to address those sorts of matters. So it's called Simulation Deck, and it's under contract by a provider through TSA, and is a very realistic simulation of the types of news media coverage and social media posts that you'd be dealing with in the scenarios that we exercise. Thanks.
Yeah, Greg, I'm going to take a slightly different tact for that response. I would suggest that any organization engaged in emergency management needs to clearly understand how they are going to monitor social media feeds, either through their own resources or through a partner that can help curate some of that information, how they're going to monitor it, clearly defined criteria for what may need additional response activities, and then clearly articulated plans on how those are going to be handled internally. Many times, to Tom's point, it's not just about your emergency management team, but may need engagement from your corporate communications office, your human resources office, or other organizations that may have operational impact from what you're picking up through those social media feeds. I know that we've set up a team just recently, then one of their primary focuses is specifically on that. And based on predefined criteria, a proper engagement of our different internal teams to respond if and when we think there is potential impact to our people, our assets, or our operations. So it's one that every organization, I think, is starting to work on, and I would suggest probably needs to continue to focus on as a way to understand potential threats that may impact your operations. Greg?
Great, thanks, Ken. I got 4:30, so I think we've got a couple of questions out there. I don't know how, Laura, how you want to deal with these questions if we follow up after, but I'll punch you back over to Laura. Laura?
Thanks, Greg. We're up against 5:30, so I'm going to go ahead and pass the closing remarks for the day over to Tom Moran. Tom?
Okay, thank you, Laura. Kent, Tom, Jim, thank you very much. It's funny.